Are you an intuitive introvert? Carl Jung left a message just for you. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Carl Jung. Have you ever felt that the most important truths don't come from the outside world, but rise from deep within? In today's video from Spiritual Wisdom, we explore Carl Jung's powerful message for intuitive introverts, a message that reminds us that our inner fantasies, our private visions, and our quiet insights are not meaningless illusions, but living energies capable of shaping reality itself. What if your inner world is not a weakness, but your greatest power? If you've ever felt misunderstood, spiritually deep, or uniquely intuitive, this message is for you. Apply these insights to your daily life and watch how clarity, growth, and happiness begin to unfold. Drop a comment below. How do you relate to Jung's idea that fantasy is a form of energy? Do your inner images shape your outer world? Let's start a soul-level conversation. 1. Fantasy is real and powerful. Carl Jung's spiritual wisdom pierces through the noise of the modern world to deliver a timeless truth. What most people call fantasy, he called psychic fact. If you're an intuitive introvert, you've likely been told that your inner world is just imagination, something to be dismissed. But Jung challenges this, urging you to see that the vivid images within your mind are not only real, they're powerful. These inner visions, often brushed off by the world as illusions, are actually energetic blueprints of potential and transformation. In a society obsessed with productivity and visible results, this insight is revolutionary. Jung viewed fantasy as a form of energy, a tangible force that, although it cannot be weighed or touched, carries weight in the spiritual realm and manifests in the material world. When you see a bridge, a home, a symphony, or a novel, remember, they were once someone's fantasy. Your intuitive mind doesn't just daydream. It shapes reality before reality exists. That's the essence of spiritual awakening, realizing that what you feel and sense internally is not less than reality. It precedes it. In our modern lives, filled with distractions, constant notifications, and pressure to conform, intuitive introverts often find themselves doubting their inner voice. But Jung reminds you that your fantasies are sacred messages, forms of spiritual communication that carry a kind of truth too subtle for the five senses. This is especially important for men between 30 and 65, those in the heart of their life's responsibilities, where practical thinking often overtakes inner vision. If you've ever silenced your spiritual intuition for the sake of being rational or reliable, it's time to reclaim the forgotten wisdom that your internal world is not a weakness. It's a compass. In moments when you sense something is off, when a dream lingers, when a creative idea sparks but seems too impractical, pause. These are not distractions. They are invitations. Invitations to explore the deeper layers of yourself and align with a path that is both meaningful and true. So the next time your mind drifts into fantasy, don't dismiss it. Ask yourself, what truth is trying to reach me? What energy is asking to be made real through me? Your spiritual awakening is not about escaping reality, but about integrating the invisible into your daily decisions. Jung's insight is not just psychological. It is a call to trust the energy of your inner world. In a culture that values logic over intuition, external evidence over inner knowing, Jung reminds you that the most powerful transformations begin not with action, but with honoring the silent image that flashes through your mind. Because that image, it's not just fantasy. It's spiritual energy asking to be formed. Let it guide you. Let it awaken you. And then ask yourself, what would happen if I started taking my inner world as seriously as my outer world? It's not just self-questioning. It's the beginning of real power. Comment below, I embrace this power. 2. Introverted intuition focuses on the inner world. Carl Jung once said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." If you're someone who often finds yourself drawn inward towards a quiet world filled with symbols, feelings, and deep impressions, you might be tapping into what Jung called introverted intuition. This isn't just a personality quirk. It's a spiritual compass guiding you beneath the surface of things. Introverted intuition, as Jung described it, is a way of seeing beyond the noise of the outside world. It focuses not on facts and appearances, but on symbolic images, archetypes, and hidden meanings that emerge from the unconscious. In a society that often rewards extroversion and fast decision-making, being an intuitive introvert can feel like living in a different dimension. You may not always have the words to explain what you sense, but you just know when something is off, or when something deeper is trying to speak through the moment. That's not a weakness. That's spiritual growth in motion. You're not just thinking. You're listening to something timeless inside you. Let's say you're sitting with a friend, and they're telling you about a new job they're excited about. Everyone around them is cheering, but something inside you tugs. There's no clear reason why, but you sense that something doesn't sit right. Later, it turns out the company had hidden issues. You didn't have proof, but you had perception. This is how introverted intuition works. It quietly unpacks spiritual truths long before they're revealed to the world. It's the subtle voice of your soul, trying to keep you aligned. In a modern world flooded with distractions, notifications, and quick answers, people who rely on introverted intuition often feel like outsiders. But maybe that's because they're tuned into a different channel, the one broadcasting messages meant for those on a path of inner discovery. And here's the question I want to ask you. How often do you trust your inner knowing, even when it doesn't make logical sense? How often do you give yourself permission to pause, reflect, and let your spiritual compass guide you rather than chasing clarity in the chaos? If you're nodding quietly to yourself right now, then Jung's message was meant for you. He believed that the intuitive introvert is someone who doesn't just perceive the world, they feel its soul, its unconscious motivations, its symbolic truths. You might not talk much about what you see, but it shapes your life in ways others will never understand. So, what's the takeaway? If you are an intuitive introvert, don't let the world convince you that your spiritual depth is impractical or strange. It's not. In fact, it might be the very thing the world needs more of: people who can pause, feel, discern, and connect with life on a soul level. Use this gift, hone it, let it guide your relationships, your decisions, and your personal healing. Spirituality isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it whispers through intuition, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. That someone might be you. And if that resonates, ask yourself, what inner truth have I been ignoring that might actually be the key to my next chapter? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how this has shaped your journey. 3. Society misunderstands intuitive introverts. Have you ever felt like your thoughts run so deep that words just can't capture them? Like there's a rich inner world inside you, full of insight and vision, but the moment you try to speak it out loud, it gets lost in translation? If so, you're not alone and you're not broken. You might just be an intuitive introvert. And Carl Jung had something deeply important to say to people like you. In a world that rewards loud voices, fast reactions, and visible achievement, those who live more internally, who see life through symbols, emotions, and subtle energies are often misunderstood, overlooked, or even labeled as strange. But Jung, the father of analytical psychology, knew better. He once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." This quote captures the essence of spiritual wisdom for intuitive introverts. Your inner life is not just valid, it's sacred. You see, society often praises extroversion as the standard for success. People are expected to be sociable, quick, assertive, and expressive. But intuitive introverts don't operate on that frequency. Their energy is more subtle, like the wind moving beneath the surface of water. They experience truth, not just through logic, but through deep knowing, through dreams, archetypes, and quiet inner revelations. And yet, this depth is rarely acknowledged or appreciated. Think about it. Have you ever shared a profound inner insight only to be met with blank stares or polite nods? That sense of being too much or too weird can create emotional distance and alienation, making it hard for intuitive introverts to find a true sense of belonging. But spiritual wisdom reminds us that not all gifts are meant to be loud. Some are meant to be still, quiet, and transformative, just like you. Carl Jung taught that intuitive types access the unconscious in a way others cannot. Their minds are wired to pick up on patterns, hidden meanings, and symbolic truths. But the real challenge comes in articulating this inner world to people who don't perceive reality the same way. This is where the disconnect happens, where intuitive introverts may be seen as aloof, vague, or even irrational. But Jung didn't see them that way. He saw them as seekers, alchemists of the soul, carrying a torch of inner truth in a world that often favors surface over depth. Isn't it time we started honoring that? Isn't it time you started honoring that within yourself? So let me ask you this. What would change in your life if you stopped trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for you? What would it feel like to trust your inner voice, even when no one else understands it? This is the beginning of spiritual awakening, the moment when you realize your intuitive nature is not a flaw, but a calling. Carl Jung believed that wholeness comes from integration, not imitation. That means your path isn't about becoming more like them. It's about becoming more like you. So if you've ever felt spiritually homesick, as if your soul is waiting to be seen, perhaps this is your calling. The world may not always understand intuitive introverts, but that doesn't mean your inner vision is wrong. In fact, it may be more true than anything you can say. Trust it, nurture it, share it with those who truly understand, because your inner world is not just a refuge, it is your gift to the world. And that, my friend, is spiritual wisdom. Carl Jung's true wisdom. Comment below I trust and nurture it. 4. The weight of symbolic insight. Have you ever walked into a room and sensed something was off before a single word was spoken? That's not a coincidence. That's the quiet language of intuition. And for men who identify as intuitive introverts, Carl Jung believed this wasn't just personality, it was spiritual design. Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." This awakening, however, doesn't always come with clarity. It often arrives as symbols, metaphors, an unspoken knowing that the world barely understands. Unlike extroverted types who anchor their reality in the tangible, the measurable, and the seen, intuitive introverts live in a different dimension altogether, one built from shifting symbolic images, emotional truths, and archetypal meaning. They move not from fact to fact, but from vision to insight, decoding universal truths that others may miss completely. This is where the journey of spiritual awakening begins, not through noise, but through inner clarity. Carl Jung observed that intuitive introverts are often deeply absorbed in the realm of the symbolic. They are not distracted. They are tuned into a different frequency, a spiritual one, while others may see their quietness as aloofness or label their intense focus on the invisible as mystical or eccentric. The reality is they're reading life through a different lens. These individuals are constantly interpreting dreams, sensing undercurrents in relationships, and picking up on patterns that transcend the present moment. They're not just reflective, they're prophetic in the way they carry meaning. Yet there's a challenge. Because their dominant mode of processing bypasses physical sensation, they often suppress the practical or material aspects of life. That means while they might have a profound vision about the purpose of life, they may struggle to fix a leaking sink or meet a deadline without feeling internally fragmented. This doesn't make them flawed. It makes them wired for a different kind of contribution. In a world that often demands fast answers, visible results, and constant motion, these men can feel like misfits. But Jung's message to you is this: your spiritual gifts are not meant to be understood by everyone. They are meant to awaken the few who are ready. Your ability to sit in silence, to interpret symbols, and to hold emotional truths without running from them, that is sacred. And in a modern culture that is becoming increasingly loud, distracted, and disconnected from depth, your presence is needed now more than ever. But let me ask you something. Are you honoring your spiritual nature, or are you still trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for you? So if you've ever been accused of being too dreamy, too internal, or too intense, know this: you are not broken. You are spiritually awake in a world that is still asleep. Your insights may not be measurable, but they are meaningful. And the path forward is not to explain yourself louder, but to walk your path deeper. Jung's message wasn't just psychological, it was spiritual. The weight of symbolic insight is heavy, but it is also holy. Let that truth guide your steps today. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Your journey to stoic self-mastery and victory continues with each lesson. 5. They are often misjudged as strange or detached. Have you ever felt like people completely misunderstood you, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't say? If you're an intuitive introvert, Carl Jung believed your inner world holds more truth than any external validation, and yet that same rich inner life can make others label you as strange, detached, or even aloof. But let's get one thing clear. This is not a flaw. It's a spiritual trait. You process life through images, symbols, and sensations that don't always make sense to the outside world. But that doesn't mean they aren't powerful. In fact, Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." That inward gaze, so natural to intuitive introverts, is the very gateway to spiritual growth. But here's the challenge. Because your communication is episodic, symbolic, and emotionally nuanced, it often gets misread. People see your stillness and assume you're cold. They observe your silence and think you're disinterested. They notice you drifting into thought and believe you're lost in fantasy. What they don't see is the rich inner dialogue you're constantly having, an unfolding of insights, patterns, and subtle truths that others might miss completely. Let me share a story to bring this to life. A man named Daniel, a quiet graphic designer in his mid-30s, was constantly labeled as off by his coworkers. He didn't engage in small talk, rarely joined team lunches, and seemed to live in his own world. What they didn't know was that Daniel had a vivid, intuitive mind. He was constantly thinking in symbols, colors, and abstract connections. One day, when a major project was about to collapse due to a lack of creative direction, Daniel stepped up. He presented a design that didn't just solve the problem, it elevated the entire brand. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy, but it was spiritually aligned, symbolically rich, and deeply intuitive. Suddenly, the same colleagues who once labeled him as strange were now calling him a genius. So what changed? Not Daniel, but their perception of what depth truly looks like. This brings us to a question I want you to sit with. How often have you suppressed your inner wisdom just to appear more normal? And at what cost? You see, intuitive introverts are not here to blend in. You're here to see what others miss, to feel what others ignore, and to bring forth ideas and insights that are rooted in a higher awareness. But for this to happen, you must stop shrinking yourself for the comfort of others. The world doesn't need more surface-level chatter. It needs your depth, your symbolism, your spiritual clarity. If your energy is often misread, let it be misread. If your silence makes people uncomfortable, let it. Because in your stillness lies wisdom, and in your detachment lies vision. Jung's teachings remind us that the most significant forms of transformation don't begin in the spotlight. They start in the shadows of solitude. So here's the lesson for you. Spiritual growth doesn't always look like grand statements or social integration. Sometimes it looks like walking alone with clarity, speaking in symbols that only a few understand, and choosing depth over performance. Don't be afraid of being misunderstood. Be afraid of betraying your inner truth. Because the path of the intuitive introvert is not just about personality, it's about purpose. And if you listen closely, your soul is already leading the way. Comment below. I listen to my soul. 6. Introverted intuition holds prophetic power. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." This powerful idea brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of spiritual wisdom and psychology. The function, known as introverted intuition, which Jung believed holds the key to perceiving the invisible threads of fate and meaning that others often overlook. If you're an intuitive introvert, you may have felt at times that you just knew something before it happened, not through logic, but through a quiet inner certainty. Jung referred to this phenomenon as accessing the numinous dimension of the unconscious, where symbolic truths, archetypes, and spiritual insights live and move beyond the boundaries of rational thought. Introverted intuition is not just about thinking deeply. It's about sensing patterns that haven't yet fully formed in the outer world. It's like reading the emotional or energetic blueprint of what is to come. You may not be able to explain why you feel something is about to shift, but you feel it in your bones, in your dreams, in the images that float across your inner vision. While others rely on tangible data, you move through life guided by unseen cues, gut feelings, and symbolic flashes that seem almost prophetic, though they may not make sense to others until much later. Have you ever had a dream or sudden insight that came true weeks or even months later? Have you found yourself understanding someone's soul without them ever speaking a word? If so, you're not alone, and it's not a coincidence. Jung understood this as part of the deeper structure of the psyche, what he called the collective unconscious, a realm that all humans tap into. But intuitive introverts experience more vividly. This inner realm speaks in symbols, visions, and sudden knowing, and it can guide you like a spiritual compass if you learn to trust it. The challenge, of course, is that the world often dismisses what can't be seen or measured, leaving intuitive individuals feeling isolated, even misunderstood. But the truth is, this form of inner knowing is a sacred gift. It's part of your spiritual awakening, your invitation to live not just by logic, but by a deeper connection to life's unfolding mystery. The question is, are you honoring these intuitive whispers, or are you pushing them aside because they don't fit the usual mold? Carl Jung's spiritual wisdom reminds us that not everything that is true is immediately demonstrable, and not everything that is demonstrable is deeply meaningful. So the next time you feel something stirring inside you, stop, listen, and ask yourself, what truth is trying to come through me? In a world that celebrates noise and speed, the quiet knowing within may be just the voice we need. Let it speak. Comment below. I listen to my inner voice. 7. The burden of solitude and incommunicability. There's a hidden burden that many intuitive introverts carry, a silent weight few ever notice but deeply feel. And it's the burden of seeing more than they can say. Carl Jung once observed, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." For the intuitive man, this inward gaze is not just a preference. It's a calling, a sacred blueprint for his spiritual awakening. You begin to see patterns others overlook, feel energies that are dismissed as nonsense, and envision possibilities long before they arrive. But what happens when you try to articulate what you've seen? Often, words fall short. You speak, and people tilt their heads in confusion. You share a glimpse of your vision, and others label it too abstract, too dreamy, too much. So you retreat not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. You learn that silence protects the sacred, and solitude becomes a sanctuary. Yet here lies the paradox. This inner depth that grants you profound spiritual insight can also isolate you from the world you live in. You walk through life as if you're in it, but not of it. While others bond over surface-level conversation, you long for depth, for meaning, for conversations that touch the soul, not just skim the surface. And this incommunicability becomes both your strength and your struggle. On one hand, it sharpens your intuition and fuels your creative insight. On the other, it separates you from those who can't meet you at that depth. In modern life, this often shows up in boardrooms, relationships, and even friendships, where your inner clarity feels like a foreign language. But what if this solitude isn't a curse, but a necessary crucible for transformation? What if being misunderstood is actually the universe's way of keeping your vision protected until the world is ready? The intuitive introvert is not broken. He is simply tuned into a frequency that not everyone can hear. You are not here to conform. You are here to awaken. And your spiritual path isn't one of noise, but of discernment. So instead of shrinking to fit into shallow spaces, honor your depth. Channel your insight into your work, your art, your presence. The world may not always understand you, but the right people, those with eyes to see and hearts to feel, will recognize your light without explanation. Have you ever felt this tension between your inner knowing and the inability of the outside world to receive it? It is not your failure. It is your calling to rise. Because your solitude is not absence, but preparation. Your silence is not emptiness, but sacred space. And your journey, though quiet, is incredibly loud in the spiritual realm. This is not the time to doubt your design. This is the time to strengthen your faith in the invisible path that is unfolding within you. So take a breath, stand firm in your truth, and know that your inner world is not so much. It is the birthplace of something eternal. That, my friend, is the sign of a man who is not only introverted, but also spiritually awakened. Comment below. I choose spiritual awakening. 8. Their lives are their message. What if I told you that your quiet presence, your depth, your sensitivity to the unseen are not weaknesses, but spiritual strengths that the world desperately needs? Carl Jung once said, "Their lives are their message." And in that one sentence, he captured the essence of intuitive introverts. You may not always feel the urge to speak loudly or debate logically, and that's not because you're lacking something. It's because you're tuned into a different kind of truth. You live through meaning, you communicate through energy, and you teach through being. Your life itself becomes a quiet revolution against a world obsessed with noise and spectacle. This is the spiritual path of those who embody an alternative way of knowing and being one, rooted in intuition, reflection, and depth. In today's society, where attention spans are shorter than ever and external achievement is worshipped, people often overlook the richness of the inner world. But spiritual growth doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in silence, in solitude, and in deep inner listening. Just think about a person in your life who doesn't talk much, but when they do, every word feels like it matters. Or someone who lives so authentically that just being around them shifts your perspective. That's the kind of quiet impact Jung was pointing to. And maybe that's you. Maybe your gift isn't to teach with a microphone, but with presence, with how you treat others, how you remain grounded when chaos erupts, or how you seek truth even when it's uncomfortable. Let me tell you a quick story. There's a man I once knew who worked as a janitor at a school. He barely said a word to anyone, but every student respected him deeply. He would leave little notes of encouragement in the hallways, pick up trash without being asked, and somehow always knew when someone needed a smile. No one ever saw him preaching or teaching, but in a way, he taught more about kindness, responsibility, and spiritual grace than many professional speakers. His life was the message, and that's what Jung was getting at. In the heart of every intuitive introvert is a spiritual compass quietly guiding their steps, not to be popular, but to be purposeful. Not to be seen, but to see deeply. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever felt that your way of being is different from what society expects, but quietly powerful in its own way? Could it be that your very existence is a form of spiritual teaching? If so, perhaps you're here not to fit in, but to guide others through your example. As you reflect on this, I want you to remember that spiritual growth doesn't always look like loud breakthroughs or grand transformations. Sometimes it's about living in alignment with your truth, even when no one is watching. Your life lived with depth, empathy, and quiet integrity is a sacred contribution to this world. Never underestimate that. If this resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe your way of living can be a message in itself? Let's grow together through this journey of introspection and silent wisdom. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Your journey to stoic self-mastery and victory continues with each lesson. 9. Most people are a mix of types. Let's talk about something Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers in psychology, wanted us to understand deeply. Most people are not just one type. In fact, Jung emphasized that purely intuitive introverts are quite rare. Instead, he explained that we are all made up of a unique combination of psychological functions. You might primarily lead with intuition, but that doesn't mean your personality is fully defined by it. According to Jung's theory of psychological types, every person has a dominant function, like intuition, that takes the lead in how they see the world and make decisions. But there's always a secondary or auxiliary function, like thinking, feeling, or sensing, that plays a powerful supporting role, helping to create a more stable, flexible, and balanced inner life. This mix of internal traits forms the psychological blueprint of how we operate in the world. And here's where spiritual wisdom comes in, because once you begin to understand your dominant and auxiliary functions, you don't just gain insight into your personality. You begin to unlock the deeper layers of your soul's design. Isn't it powerful to consider that your inner wiring is not random, but purposeful? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can you become who you are if you haven't learned the tools to decode your inner architecture? If you're an intuitive introvert, you may often feel misunderstood, even by yourself. You might sense things others miss, feel deeply connected to symbols and meanings that are hard to express, or get overwhelmed in environments that lack depth. But maybe the reason you're overwhelmed isn't because you're broken. Maybe it's because you've only been taught to look at yourself through a narrow lens. Jung's spiritual wisdom invites us to view our personalities like instruments, each with unique tuning. And when the dominant and auxiliary functions play in harmony, life begins to sound like music instead of noise. Now let's ground this idea in something relatable. Have you ever met someone who was extremely analytical but surprisingly empathetic in the way they listen? Or maybe you know someone who's deeply imaginative yet unusually practical. That's not a contradiction. It's a perfect example of Jung's theory in action. These are people who have a dominant function, like intuition or thinking, but also a complementary one that balances them out. So instead of asking, "Am I an intuitive introvert or something else entirely?" perhaps the real question is, what are the other inner tools I've been gifted that I haven't explored yet? This opens the door to self-acceptance and growth rather than boxing yourself into a single identity. The beauty of Carl Jung's message is that it's not just about labeling yourself, it's about awakening. It's about discovering the patterns in your inner world and learning to live more intentionally and peacefully. When you understand your personality mix, you begin to see how you respond to stress, what energizes you, how you connect with others, and what your soul truly desires. And from there, spiritual awakening begins not through major external events, but through quiet self-awareness. So how clear are you about the functions that guide your decisions, relationships, and dreams? And more importantly, are you willing to explore the less dominant parts of yourself to achieve true balance? Because in doing so, you not only understand your personality, but you also step into a more fulfilling version of your life purpose. Comment below. I step into my full version of myself. 10. Final insight. Intuition is the voice of the unconscious. Have you ever had a gut feeling about something? A quiet inner voice that spoke before logic could catch up, guiding you through life's murkier moments? That, my friend, is not just instinct. Carl Jung called it perception via the unconscious, the essence of intuition. And if you're an intuitive introvert, you've been given a rare and powerful tool that many ignore or dismiss. In a world driven by data, speed, and external validation, Jung's message still rings true today. Your ability to access the invisible is not a flaw. It's the very proof of a deep spiritual intelligence that's awakening within you. While others chase certainty in the external, you are quietly tuned to something far older and wiser than your inner world. Jung didn't see intuition as mere fantasy. He saw it as a function of the unconscious, the part of the psyche that holds ancient memory, symbolic truth, and untapped potential. It is often in times of crisis or confusion, when facts fail and logic breaks down, that this inner compass rises and whispers the path forward. Have you noticed that? In the silence between your thoughts. Have you ever sensed a direction forming before you had words for it? That's not your imagination. It's your soul speaking. Many men live half alive because they've been taught to silence their intuition, to ignore their spiritual senses in favor of cold facts. But here's the truth. Real strength comes from knowing when to listen to the unseen. Jung believed that the unconscious mind isn't a dark basement to be feared. It's a vast inner temple filled with sacred guidance, creativity, and spiritual energy. To walk through life without honoring that voice is to miss the very core of your spiritual awakening. And yet, society has conditioned us to believe that intuition is irrational, that feelings are distractions, and that stillness is laziness. But what if your quiet moments of reflection, your solitude, and your deep knowing are actually the birthplace of transformation? As Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Your spiritual path begins not in noise, but in awareness, and your intuition is the torch that lights the way. Let's be honest, we live in a time where emotional numbness is praised as stoicism, and outward performance is mistaken for purpose. But intuitive men sense that something deeper calls them. If you're one of them, you are not weak. You are on the verge of a breakthrough. Your gift lies in feeling the truth before it's visible, in seeing patterns others miss, and in trusting the invisible thread of meaning that weaves through your life. So let me ask you this: how would your life change if you started honoring your intuition not as a vague feeling, but as a sacred message from your unconscious? What if instead of silencing your inner voice, you strengthened it with stillness, reflection, and spiritual practice? The world doesn't need more noise. It needs men who are deeply rooted, spiritually awake, and brave enough to follow their inner compass. Intuition isn't a luxury. It's a necessity in a world that has lost its way. And in your journey as a man, it may just be the most trustworthy guide you'll ever have. What part of this message resonates with you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how this has shaped your journey. As we come to the end of this journey into Carl Jung's message for intuitive introverts, remember, your inner world is not a weakness, but a compass. Jung's insights into the introvert-extrovert spectrum are not rigid categories, but guiding maps to help us better understand our own psychological landscape. Whether you lead with intuition, sensation, or thought, it's about embracing how your mind uniquely processes the world and using that awareness to grow. At Spiritual Wisdom, we believe self-understanding is the foundation of spiritual awakening and personal happiness. So how do Jung's ideas resonate with your own inner life? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this message spoke to you. Your journey of spiritual growth begins with a single step inward. They love you, so why are they ignoring you? The Hidden Psychology, Carl Jung. So as we've explored today, love is not always straightforward. Sometimes, the deeper it goes, the more it triggers hidden fears and unresolved emotions in the other person. As Carl Jung taught, what we awaken in someone else's unconscious can cause them to pull away, not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed by what they feel. True love is not control, but a journey of mutual growth. If it's real, it will find its way back. Have you ever faced a situation like this? Share your story or insight in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a soul-stirring insight. 1. Love triggers the unconscious, not just the heart. Love, as Carl Jung warned, doesn't just stir the heart, it disturbs the soul. Especially for men between the ages of 30 and 65, who often carry decades of emotional conditioning, love can act as a spiritual awakening, not a comforting escape. Jung believed that true love doesn't just touch the surface of our desires, but drills deep into the psyche, unearthing unconscious fears, childhood wounds, and old emotional scars we thought we had buried long ago. When someone loves you deeply, truly, soulfully, it doesn't only activate longing or passion, it can shake the foundation of their emotional defenses. And in modern life, where men are expected to be strong, rational, and in control at all times, this sudden emotional upheaval can be terrifying. That's why a man who loves you may suddenly withdraw, ignore, or become cold, not out of indifference, but because the relationship has triggered something far more complex than just affection. It has touched his shadow, the hidden self that Jung described as the repository of everything we reject or repress. This is not rejection. This is psychological self-preservation. In today's world, where relationships are often reduced to text messages and short-term connections, the moment a deep, spiritual connection forms one that feels different, unfamiliar, and intense, it can push a man to retreat. The silence, the distance, the ignoring, these are not always signs that he doesn't care. They can be signs that he cares so much. He's terrified of what it awakens in him. That fear might come from early abandonment, a sense of inadequacy, or the unconscious belief that he doesn't deserve such love. As Jung emphasized, we don't just fall in love with a person, we fall into the projections of our psyche. We see parts of ourselves in the other person, including parts we've disowned or never learned to love. That's why spiritual relationships that awaken us can be so volatile. They force us to look at ourselves in a way that surface-level relationships never could. If you're experiencing this today, if someone you love is ignoring you without explanation, take a step back and consider the possibility that your presence in their life has stirred something unconscious and raw. This isn't a time to chase or demand clarity. It's a time to understand that spiritual love is not always soothing. It is often disruptive. It doesn't just want to make you feel good. It wants to make you whole. And wholeness requires that both people face their shadows. In this light, ignoring isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's a subconscious call for space to process a psychological storm. To the men listening, if you found yourself walking away from someone you love, sit with discomfort instead of running. Ask yourself what you're really afraid of. Is it her, or what she reflects back to you? And to those on the receiving end of that silence, know this: spiritual awakening rarely comes gently. It often arrives wrapped in confusion and silence. Don't take it personally. Take it as a sign that your love might be opening doors within them that have never been opened before. In a world addicted to instant gratification, true love remains a sacred interruption. It is not always neat, logical, or convenient, but it is always transformative. As Jung said, until you become conscious of the unconscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it destiny. Love, especially spiritual love, is one of the most powerful forces that can bring the unconscious into consciousness. And sometimes, the silence you hear is not an absence, but the soul processing something it never expected to find. Comment below. I listen to my inner voice. 2. Ignoring may be a defense mechanism, not rejection. When someone you care about begins to ignore you without warning, your first instinct might be to believe they've stopped loving you, that something about you pushed them away. But what if I told you that their silence could actually be a reflection of just how deeply they feel for you? In the world of spirituality and emotional psychology, this kind of withdrawal is often not a sign of rejection, but a sign of inner chaos. Carl Jung, the great analytical psychologist, taught that our shadow, the unconscious part of us we try to hide, can become activated in the presence of deep connection. When love touches a part of someone they haven't yet made peace with, it doesn't always feel like bliss. It can feel like a threat. This is when emotional avoidance becomes a subconscious tool for survival. Ignoring you may be the only way they know how to cope with the fear of losing control, of being seen too clearly, or of confronting parts of themselves they've kept buried. This behavior is not necessarily about you. It's about the intensity of the mirror you hold up to their soul. Let's bring this into a real-life situation. Have you ever had a moment when someone's kindness made you uncomfortable? Not because you didn't like it, but because you didn't know how to receive it. Maybe a friend offered you a level of affection or support you weren't used to, and instead of leaning in, you pulled away. It wasn't about them. It was about what their presence stirred within you. In the same way, someone ignoring you might actually be wrestling with their own unhealed wounds, fears of vulnerability, or past trauma that your love unintentionally awakens. Their silence is not a declaration that you're unworthy. It's a sign that they're overwhelmed by the emotional intensity. It's like standing in front of a spiritual mirror and seeing not only who they are, but who they're afraid to become. And when people aren't ready to grow, they retreat. So let me ask you, when someone pulls away from you, do you instantly personalize it? Or can you pause to consider what kind of inner battle they might be facing? Spiritual growth often demands that we don't take everything at face value. It teaches us to look deeper, to see silence not as a wall, but as a doorway into the unseen, into the soul's language of fear and transformation. That doesn't mean you should tolerate disrespect or emotional neglect, but it does mean you can start seeing the behavior through a lens of understanding rather than pain. Sometimes, the one who ignores you is the one who is most afraid to lose you, because your presence challenges the identity they've built around not feeling enough. Ultimately, the lesson is this: not all silence is rejection. Some silences are a sign of an inner storm. If love opens someone's wound, healing it is not your job, but an invitation to grow spiritually. Learn to recognize when someone's withdrawal is due to their own struggles, not your values. By doing so, you not only protect your heart, but also expand your capacity for compassion and inner peace. That is the true power of spiritual growth, learning to stay balanced, even when others are out of balance. Comment below. I choose spiritual growth. 3. Emotional intimacy awakens. Fear of vulnerability. When emotional intimacy begins to deepen, when someone starts to truly feel seen, known, and accepted for who they are not, for who they pretend to be, it can stir something unexpected. Fear. And not just any fear, but the fear of vulnerability. You see, the closer the emotional bond becomes, the more it threatens the protective walls people have built over a lifetime. For those who carry spiritual wounds, perhaps from abandonment in childhood, betrayal in past relationships, or rejection during formative years, being loved deeply doesn't always feel safe. It can actually feel like a loss of control. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In the realm of love, this rings especially true. People unconsciously push away what they most desire when it starts to awaken their most buried fears. This is where spiritual wisdom comes in, not just as knowledge, but as awareness. The kind of awareness that helps you recognize that when someone starts ignoring you, it might not mean they've stopped loving you. Instead, it could mean that your emotional closeness is triggering their unresolved pain, making them retreat as a form of self-protection. Have you ever felt like the more you opened your heart to someone, the more they began to pull away? If so, you're not alone, and you're not imagining things. This isn't a simple case of emotional detachment. It's often a subconscious defense mechanism. Many people believe that love is only about joy, warmth, and connection. But Carl Jung teaches us that love also exposes the shadow of the part of ourselves we hide, deny, or fear. When love gets close enough to shine a light on that shadow, some people panic. They might distance themselves, go silent, or even sabotage the relationship, not because they don't care, but because caring too much terrifies them. It's a paradox. They crave closeness, yet flee from it. They want to be held, yet they're terrified of being seen. And this internal contradiction creates confusing behavior that hurts not only you, but also themselves. So, what does this mean for you? It means don't rush to internalize their silence as rejection. Instead, ask yourself, what does this behavior reflect about their emotional wounds? Are they pulling away because they don't love you, or because they're overwhelmed by how deeply they do? In the world of spiritual wisdom, we learn that love is a mirror. It reflects not just beauty and harmony, but also hidden pain and unresolved trauma. And sometimes, when you reflect too much light, the other person isn't ready to face their own darkness. That's not your fault. It's just where they are on their journey. The question is, can you see their silence not as abandonment, but as a sign of inner conflict? And are you able to hold compassion without abandoning yourself in the process? Emotional intimacy is a gift, but not everyone is emotionally equipped to receive it. So before you chase the one who's ignoring you, pause and reflect, not just on their actions, but on the spiritual lessons behind them. After all, as Carl Jung taught us, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. What transformation is this moment asking of you? And how can you respond with both love and boundaries, compassion and wisdom? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how this has shaped your journey. For the shadow self sabotages love unconsciously. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. These powerful words from Carl Jung open the door to a deeper truth, one that many men overlook when love turns cold and silence replaces connection. You see, in relationships, especially those that stir deep emotions, the spiritual journey doesn't always look like peace and harmony. Sometimes, love activates hidden wounds buried so deeply in the unconscious that even the person experiencing them cannot understand their own reactions. When someone you love begins to ignore you, not with malice, but with quiet withdrawal, it's easy to internalize that as rejection, as if you're somehow not enough. But here's the spiritual wisdom that Jung left behind. What we repress does not vanish. It gets projected. In other words, their silence may not be about you at all. It may be their shadow, the denied, unacknowledged, and unloved parts of themselves rising to the surface in the presence of real love. And that kind of love is terrifying, not because it's harmful, but because it's honest. It shines a light on the parts of them that are still trapped in pain, shame, fear, or unresolved trauma. Your love becomes a mirror, and what they see reflected back isn't just affection. It's the parts of themselves they've tried to bury for decades. And so, they run. They ignore it. They retreat. But their avoidance isn't necessarily a lack of love. It's a reaction to an inner war. In modern life, this plays out more than we admit. A man might find the woman of his dreams, but the moment things feel real, he pulls away. Why? Because true intimacy is not just physical, it's spiritual. It triggers a spiritual awakening, and with that comes the confrontation of everything that has been left in the dark. The shadow self doesn't want to be seen, but love exposes it anyway. So what can you do? First, understand that being ignored in love is not always a personal failure. It may be a reflection of someone else's internal chaos, their fear of being vulnerable, or their resistance to transformation. Second, this is your invitation not to chase them, but to turn inward. What is their silence showing you about your own wounds, your own expectations, your own emotional patterns? Third, instead of clinging or reacting, hold space with dignity, strength, and awareness. As Jung taught, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Let this be the moment you choose awakening over reaction, spiritual clarity over emotional chaos. Ask yourself, are you truly seeing them, or are you reacting to the absence of validation? And deeper still, are you at peace with your own presence when love feels distant? Real love requires us to meet ourselves fully before we can truly meet another. In their silence, you may find your own voice. In their withdrawal, you may discover your true power. The man who can sit with his pain without projecting it, he's the one who rises. He becomes grounded, spiritual, awake. So the next time someone pulls away from you, ask yourself, what part of their shadow did my light just touch? Because when love feels confusing, that's often when it's closest to the truth. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Your journey to stoic self-mastery and victory continues with each lesson. 5. Distance is sometimes a subconscious test of love. Sometimes, when someone loves you deeply, their first instinct is not to come closer, but to pull away. And while that may seem confusing, even painful, it often stems from something buried deep within their subconscious. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This couldn't be more true when it comes to love. Many people, without even realizing it, create distance not to abandon the relationship, but to test it. This is not a conscious or strategic decision. It's often a defense mechanism shaped by past wounds, attachment styles, and fears of vulnerability. They want to know, will you stay even when I'm not always available? Can this connection survive when I retreat into silence? It's a way to see if the relationship has roots that go deeper than daily reassurance. And while this silent test of love might feel cruel, it's a cry for emotional safety masked as withdrawal. Let's make this real with a story you might recognize in your own life. Think about someone who suddenly stopped replying to your texts, not out of anger, but out of nowhere. No fight, no warning. Maybe it was after an intense emotional moment, Perhaps you felt like things were finally getting closer, more intimate, more real, and then they disappeared. You waited, confused, wondering what went wrong. But what if nothing went wrong? What if their silence was a mirror of their inner chaos? What if their love for you triggered an old wound that told them, "This will hurt you, run before it's too late"? In a world where emotional survival has often meant shutting down, stepping back, or pretending not to care, this kind of distancing becomes a form of self-protection. It doesn't mean the love is fake. It often means the love is real and terrifying. Now, does that mean you should always wait for them to return? Not necessarily. Here's where spirituality and spiritual growth come into play. True spiritual growth invites you to understand the unseen forces behind human behavior, but it also teaches you to protect your energy, your peace, and your heart. You are not here to chase someone who is still running from their own soul. The healthiest kind of love is not proven by how much pain you can endure, but by how much peace it can bring to both people involved. So the next time someone pulls away, ask yourself, is this distance a reflection of their inner conflict or a lesson for me about my own worth? Can you hold space for their journey without abandoning your own? In the end, this hidden dynamic isn't about games. It's about fear, about wounds, about a heart unsure how to receive what it deeply desires. When someone tests love through silence, what they're really asking is it safe to be seen? Will I still be loved if I don't perform, explain, or show up perfectly? It's a shadowed plea for unconditional acceptance. But remember, your spiritual path is not just about understanding others, but also about standing in your truth. Love them, but don't lose yourself trying to prove your love. Real love should expand both souls, not shrink them. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like someone's silence was testing you? Did you stay, or did you grow from it? Share your experience below, because these are the real questions of the heart that lead us into the most profound spiritual awakening. 6. Your reaction should be rooted in self-awareness, not fear. When someone you care about suddenly begins to pull away or goes silent without explanation, your first instinct might be to panic, to overthink, or to chase after them for answers. But what if I told you that your reaction in those moments can reveal far more about your own inner world than theirs? Carl Jung, the great thinker of the unconscious, once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And that's the spiritual wisdom we must lean into when we're faced with emotional distance. Their silence may not be a reflection of your shortcomings. It could be a mirror reflecting their own unresolved battles. People often retreat when they feel emotionally overwhelmed, when love activates old wounds, or when they are confronted with parts of themselves they are not ready to face. So, if someone's absence is making you question your worth, pause and ask yourself, what wound is this silence touching in me? Is it abandonment, rejection, the fear of being unlovable? That reaction isn't something to suppress. It's an invitation to investigate. Spiritual awakening begins when we stop reacting out of fear and start responding with self-awareness. When you resist the urge to chase, to force clarity, or to beg for emotional breadcrumbs, you create space not just for them, but for yourself to understand what is truly happening beneath the surface. Because the truth is, not all distance is personal. Sometimes, people pull away not because you did something wrong, but because your presence activates something deep within them, something they're not ready to explore. And here's the hard part. You may never get the explanation you think you deserve. So the question is, what do you do with this silence? Do you let it break you or build you? In moments like this, spiritual wisdom teaches us to turn our focus inward, to be curious about our own emotional triggers rather than trying to decipher the confusion of others. Have you ever thought about how we often seek healing through the words of others, when what we really need is to listen to our inner voice? Carl Jung warned us that our shadow, the unconscious part that we deny or reject, often comes out in how we respond to rejection or ambiguity. So when someone disappears, that shadow becomes loud. But instead of running from it, what if we sat with it, understood it, and let it transform us? Because growth doesn't come from control. It comes from letting go, understanding, and being emotionally honest. The next time someone leaves you, instead of rushing to fill the void, try sitting down next to them. Let it teach you things that still need healing. Let it awaken your spiritual power. Ask yourself, what would it be like to choose peace over panic? You see, the biggest breakthroughs in love often don't happen when we cling, but when we let go with dignity, and with a deep commitment to our own emotional evolution. Comment below. I am committed to my feelings. 7. Real love evolves through awareness, not control. They say that real love doesn't chain you, it frees you. And in the words of Carl Jung, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. So let's talk about what that really means when someone you love starts ignoring you. Especially as a man in your 30s, 40s, 50s, or even 60s, this silence can feel confusing, even humiliating. You gave your heart, your presence, your effort, and now you're left with distance and questions. But what if that space isn't rejection? What if it's the exact environment required for spiritual awakening, for both you and them? Because real love is the kind that matters. The kind that endures isn't about control, manipulation, or clinging to someone until they bend to your will. It's about awareness. It's about growth. It's about creating the kind of connection that breathes, evolves, and allows both people to expand. Jung taught us that the greatest love helps us understand who we truly are. So when they walk away, the pain might actually be a portal, a signal that you are meant to evolve, not for them, but for yourself. This is spiritual maturity, knowing that if love is real, it will come back not because you chased it, but because both souls have transformed into new versions of themselves who can meet again on higher ground. And if it doesn't return, then it wasn't meant to survive the spiritual fire, and that's not a failure. That's a sacred lesson, a message that love must first deepen within yourself before it can flourish with another. So what does that look like in modern life? It means not sending that angry text when you feel ignored. It means choosing growth over reaction. It means building a life that's so fulfilling, so rooted in spiritual self-respect, that whether they come back or not, you've already won. You've already become the man you were supposed to be. So let me ask you, what would it look like if you saw silence not as abandonment, but as an invitation to expand your awareness, to reconnect with your values, to refine your purpose, to become someone whose love radiates from self-possession, not need? Because at the end of the day, that's the kind of man who doesn't just attract love, he sustains it. And when someone leaves, they remember him, not for how loud he shouted, but for how deeply he understood. That is the quiet power of spiritual wisdom. That is the real work. So if you're facing distance right now, don't just wait until you elevate. Do your inner work, embrace your shadow, walk through the pain, and transform it into strength. Love that evolves through pressure is temporary, but love that returns after spiritual transformation, that's eternal. What part of this message resonates with you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how this has shaped your journey. So as we've explored today, love is not always straightforward. Sometimes, the deeper it goes, the more it triggers hidden fears and unresolved emotions in the other person. As Carl Jung taught, what we awaken in someone else's unconscious can cause them to pull away, not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed by what they feel. True love is not control, but a journey of mutual growth. If it's real, it will find its way back. Have you ever faced a situation like this? Share your story or insight in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And hit the notification bell so you never miss a soul-stirring insight.